Welcome, everybody. Show number 22. We're back. Feels like we've been away for a little bit, but we really haven't. So it's just good to get back into this thing and get the band back together. And we have a nice slew of topics to cover on this one. So it should be pretty good timing for the week on this one, right?
Yep, never a dull moment in cybersecurity, as we know.
No,
That's
no,
true.
absolutely. Yes, we have Robinhood, we have REvil or REvil, depending kind of which side you're looking at it. A little bit about SolarWinds again, something infrastructure bill to kind of talk about. That was our topic. You guys want to dive into first? Anything top of mind?
Well, the REvil gang one is particularly interesting. REvil.
Yeah, I'm going with REvil.
Yeah.
REvil, I like
Yeah,
that
I don't
better.
Yeah, that's however you want to call them. But they're definitely doing some big things in the global stage. And it looks like a couple of their of the perps were one of the perps was apprehended, but they've identified two members. And the funny takeaway from this story to me is I was just telling Reese beforehand, like the saying, the carpenter's door is always broken,
Right.
totally applies here because their OPSEC was like terrible. They had a couple steps to be able to find out who the actual identities were. So just kind of humorous that they were able to find them that way.
Yeah, like if you kind of read it right, it's like, using, names that were on forums for years and date back and maps to like an email address. And like to your point, it's like, hey, you're doing all these crazy things in the world. And then it's like you kind of don't practice what you preach sometimes. And it leads to this. But I mean, outside of that, it's a pretty big, I think, process here and, finding and kind of moving towards getting rid of one of the most, I think, kind of notorious for this year. It seems like it's been like on the show as a recurring topic for a while now. And, now here we are making some, positive traction into cleaning things up and trying to help secure, just everybody and everything out there. And, I think we're going to see more of these things and, a pretty big joint effort across the globe. I'd be curious, I'm sure there's a lot of neat information behind closed doors and like what was really involved and how the whole thing came about with all these countries. But I'm sure on a global scale, it's probably one of the larger takedowns, in my opinion, from a, cohesiveness, across the globe of trying to do the right thing. So that to me is the interesting aspect of this.
Yep. I think another interesting point too is, and I don't know their whole bios or whatever, but you don't have to be a CISSP, a Security Plus, or have a degree in any of this to be the bad guy at the end of the day. And to your point about having some bad OPSEC, I think that's part of it, is that they just have their one mission, and that's to get the bad code, exploit it, get somebody to click the link or whatever the case is, drop that USB drive and get them to go in there and do it. So I think that's kind of interesting too, that you got to keep in mind. So all those hiring managers out there, you remember that these bad guys don't have all this formal education and certifications and everything else either. And they're out there attacking left and right. So don't let that be a barrier to get people in the door and trained and going in cybersecurity.
Yeah, and it's interesting because they're particularly young. So I wonder if that's a part of it, right? Is that, they're kind of running before they can even walk. It's a different discipline, OPSEC. So, these guys seem like they were focused on exploitation and offense. They weren't really thinking about the ramifications of getting, maybe they didn't even realize that they were going to be so successful and garner so much heat, right? So that could be part of it. The other interesting thing to note was the $10 million bounty for any of the leaders associated with the gang. So just shows not a lot of cyber criminals are going to turn down that kind of cash. So it just goes to show the level of investment they're willing to make on taking down these perps. But I think that expands their capabilities, as now you have almost like these bounty hunter, vigilante type hackers now coming after the bad guys. So it enables them to pool some knowledge and some resources from some independent workers to help find these guys. So pretty brilliant idea.
Yeah, everybody has a number, right? And loose lips will sink ships. So if it's not $1 million, it's 10 million, it's 20, somebody will eventually speak up and go get that money from that perspective. And something else that the criminals don't always know, and I know they can probably watch this, but our government has extradition agreements with all of these other countries in place. And so you let your guard down because 5 or 6 years goes by. You don't think our government has patience? They have more patience than you have.
Oh, yeah.
You will screw up and go to a country and go on a vacation and go to the beach or whatever. And the next thing you know, you're being taken off in handcuffs in your swimming trunks.
The black helicopters come in, right?
Right.
Yep.
Black van takes
Yeah,
over.
it kind of like we were saying, like actually before the show, we're talking about this, and like to your point, it's hey, like hey, like you're kind of catching some of these people, you're going to extradite them and go through the process. But to your point, at what point do they say, look, it's a 115-year sentence, or maybe if you tell me some more information, we can reduce that to 10, 20 years, right? And then to your point, most people are probably going to be like, it's going to be hard to turn that down and think about this, right? So having these bonds, I think, is a good thing because just from our perspective, we see how much damage and collateral damage these things can really cause. So, 10, 15, $20 million is like honestly a small drop in the whole global bucket of like what it can really cause, right? I mean, go back to like Colonial Pipeline and things like that. I mean, that was just massive chaos and panic. I'm sure a lot of people would have been like, yeah, I'll throw in $1,000 here and there. And, here's your $10 million bounty. And, boom, you're saving companies and chaos and confusion and things like that. So I think we're going to see more of this for sure.
That's a good point. Like the ransom is not comprehensive of the entire cost of these situations. Right?
Oh yeah,
the
it's just a
business
portion of
yeah,
it.
the operational downtime is like not, is something that's not often quantified in media, but $10 million bounty or whatever it is like I said, a drop in a bucket compared to the potential ramifications of even one compromise, let alone 10 or however many there's been just from this gang alone. So
just in 2021, right?
Right. It's almost like insurance at that point for those agencies.
I think we all know that, really like, the actual ransomware payment is, probably say this much, but the chaos of it all is, way higher, right? So
right.
Always more.
Right.
Yeah. Like 10x probably. I mean, I don't know what you see on that, but it's a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Because people don't know what to do and they overreact and they go shut everything down as part of their protocol and then bring in all these expensive IR firms. And now you got lawyers and everybody engaged and involved from that perspective. And then the business is down because you're not performing. So you have that lost revenue that didn't come in. And then you have all the cleanup costs and all the legal and reputation. And that'll just long time. And a lot of cost all involved from that. I don't envy anybody that's had to live through those type of scenarios by any means.
Yeah, so I think we're going to see more of these. And I think just want to go back to your point real quick, Sammy, is, these people are fairly young, right? So it's interesting to see like you start off as like early teens and trying to do some of the stuff and get into it. And, kind of what you're saying, Brian, some of the smartest people I know, they don't have any certs. They don't have, college degrees, and they're just geniuses at what they can do and what they can pull off. So, it's a different kind of mindset and skill set we're seeing, and kind of goes back to our previous talks about cyber careers and this and that. And, you kind of learn by doing and kind of just probably starts trying to like, hey, I want to hack my friend's Xbox or change some grades. And next thing you know, you're taking down massive corporations and, wanted by the FBI and things like that. Right. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Getting in with interesting crowds. I've always wondered, what that kind of looks like when the heat or the pressure turns on some of these gangs. Do they start to turn on each other internally? Do they start to create scapegoats? And, how do we know for sure that this guy was actually involved or if he wasn't painted to be? I mean, these are the types of people who would craft that kind of scenario or that I guess that scapegoat, right? To protect them or obfuscate their own identities. So that's another thing I'm curious into the future is how they prosecute these guys and what evidence are they going to, submit them on. And I think that's why only one of the two right now is in custody, and the other one I don't think there was any note of him actually being in custody yet. So
right,
yeah, very interesting.
What's that saying? There's no honor amongst thieves, something like that, right? So you never
definitely
know.
not.
Yeah, crazy stuff. Okay, the other kind of big one in the news recently, like real recently, is Robinhood is in the news again. Mm-hmm. For those of you in crypto, kind of know who Robinhood is and all the Wall Street bets and whatnot. But now they're in it from a cybersecurity kind of reason. I don't know, Sam. You want to kind of walk us through what you saw on that one? It would seem like a interesting case on how it all happened.
Yeah. So looked like a social engineering attack against a customer service representative. From my understanding, based on the limited data that has been revealed thus far, it sounds like they didn't get server access or or kind of any kind of administrative access on the systems itself. It was only that particular customer service system that they were able to get access to. But that said, it was about 5 million customers that were affected with full names and emails. And then I think it was a smaller subset that actually had things like date of birth, zip code, and a few other pieces of personal information. About 10 of them had extensive account details revealed, but I don't think that information was detailed yet. But yeah, pretty big, pretty big thing here. A lot of people are dismissing it because it was just email addresses, but to me, these can easily be weaponized and often can be data points that, when linked with other things, can lead to either more social engineering attacks or access to accounts via leaked credentials on a database or something. So,
so you mean if I have the list of all the email addresses and you were Robinhood, I could go and try to phish you?
That's right.
As a Robinhood account?
That's right.
Shocking.
Imagine that.
Reset your password a year.
Yeah, and what a thing to phish.
Imagine, though, if you know to just go after those specific ones, the type of damage that you could do versus just the spray attack of going after everyone, assuming you have Robinhood.
Yeah, 5 million people isn't a lot. Realistically speaking, right? So, to your point, it's still a very targeted list that you could craft and social engineer and then research, maybe this person's big into trading, whatever, or hey, their username might correlate to Reddit, and then I'm tracking it backwards, and there's your social engineering, right? So it's more about the data gathering aspect, in my opinion, than the actual attack. But like we see it that way. But I think, to your point, the general population's like, oh, well, they didn't get anything, into my account or transfer funds or trades. But again, and it kind of shows that social engineering is a very crafty way of doing things. And I think, doing it as the customer service over the phone, it takes a very interesting skill set, and you got to be a very people person. And it's amazing to kind of watch, people work on the social engineering side of things and run through these things. And, it's a art, right? And a craft. And I think that's the interesting part, is we can always constantly train our staff and train people. The phone is so hard to judge people or send extra communication, and really trust but verify. You kind of get to this flow, and you're talking, and you feel that trust with somebody, and then boom, that's all it takes, right?
Right.
Yeah. Break down the human firewall.
Yeah.
And get all that data out.
And that's the whole point of the rigorous, consistent or continuous training. It's not just to stump people or to simulate an attacker. It's to keep everybody on guard with the most up-to-date techniques. If you see it constantly, every quarter you get this simulated phishing attack, and you start to get familiar with some of these indicators, like typo squatting or out of band attachments. And then when you see it in the real world, you're like, oh, this is, maybe you'll think it's one of the simulations, and then actually it turns out you just stopped a real phishing attack. So I think it's often dismissed as maybe a less critical exercise compared to some of all the technical controls.
Right.
But in my opinion, it's probably the most critical exercise.
Flipped.
Yeah, it should be flipped. Right. It should be somewhere next to inventory management, where it's you understand your attack surface, and then a big part of that attack surface is the human layer. So, definitely, I think Robinhood has some user awareness training to do over there.
Yeah.
Yep. And if I was impacted by this, things that I would consider doing just to keep myself safe, we always assume it's more data taken than what was ever disclosed or released. So I would change my password. I would make sure multi-factor authentication is enabled. And then maybe you're not aware, but a lot of credit card companies, when you log in or whatever, you can enable your credit score that you can watch. So that's I call it a lightweight type of credit monitoring type of scenario, but that's something else you can turn on without having to have an invasive credit check or signing up for the 2-year thing that you get from some of these data breaches, and then all of a sudden you get a big bill at the end.
Right.
But that's another thing to evaluate as well, just to keep an eye on everything, and then just be more vigilant. If you get an email from Robinhood, don't click the link now. Go to their website, open up Chrome, Firefox, whatever your favorite browser is. I guess Edge. I couldn't remember the new one. It's called Edge.
Something like that. I don't know.
On the Microsoft side, open that bad boy up and just go straight to the website and log in. And if there's nothing there, or they don't have a message,
Yeah.
okay, it's not a legitimate message. So you can do some investigation on your
Or
own.
if in doubt, call them directly, go to their website, get the number. Okay. And just, physically
well, they're so
call
good
them.
at social engineering. No, I'm just
Yeah. Well, the other aspect too, I think probably adds to this, which we've kind of spoken about before in the show, is like, now that with, people are working from home, working from hybrid, it's way more distractions, right? I mean, I can imagine like, hey, you're working at home, like you're a family, your kids are running around, the dog's going nuts, someone's at the door, and someone's trying to like, get on you for like some kind of passport reset or whatever. And you're just like, you're kind of like not in your right mindset to do the proper checks, and maybe you skip one step and that's all it takes, right? So also kind of be mindful of where you're doing your work from, and just like you said, be in the moment and be aware of like now, like, oh, I got this weird email. It doesn't seem right. Great. Just ignore it or trust but verify, right?
Yeah,
Definitely.
and we mentioned on this past month during during Awareness Month, it's like slow down, people. Everybody's just so quick to clear out their inboxes. It's like, you digest the actual content that's coming in, because most people don't even look at the headers, the email headers that come in, or even have you even seen where they don't look at the subject line, maybe even the content of the email. So it's like, slow down and really like analyze these inbound messages that you're looking at, and just doing that alone probably mitigates a good percentage of attacks, because like you said, most people are just rushing. They're not intentionally being ignorant or complacent of it. They're just burdened by all the different distractions or all the different assignments that you have for back-to-back meetings, and you're just looking at media or emails real quickly. It's very
It's a product of their environment and where they're working from, right? And things like that.
Yeah, they're really looking to get you while you're down, while you're not thinking. So
just proves that social engineering is here to stay. There's no, like you said, there's no magical technical control. It's all about the training and due diligence and human firewall, as we like to call it, right? So
Yep. So here's a question I want to pose from you.
Sure.
So in the cybersecurity subreddit on Reddit, there's a user Strider755, and he asked this question: should the law impose strict liability for data breaches? I'm going to go further and define more of what he's saying here. Is it's becoming increasingly difficult to prove that a particular data breach caused a customer particular harm. After all, that harm could have come from the loss of data from a different source. It's also getting irritating seeing companies that have no idea how to protect data are simply too cheap to do so. Would a strict liability standard fix this? Strict liability means that a person is legally responsible for the consequences of an activity, even in the absence of fault or intent. In this case, it would mean that if a company held customer data and that data was subsequently stolen, the company would be liable. No ifs, ands, or buts. Sammy, I hand the floor to you. What are your thoughts?
That's an interesting question, and maybe this might even be, I don't even know, this is probably more of a compliance-related question, truly, because when I think about that, I think about all the other ways that your data is already available. So to say, hey, T-Mobile, you leaked all this data, well, your data was already leaked. But at the same time, that mentality creates room for companies to get complacent, because it's oh, your data's already out there. Why does it matter if we protect it? So I do think it's honestly a matter of triaging the data in order of importance, and then setting liability standards around that specific type of data. So if it's financial data and that's compromised, you should 100% be held liable, because that's, especially if you had control at any point in time over the storing, processing, or transmitting of that data. But if you're talking about maybe something that is already readily available, like perhaps your email or even your address, truly, I mean, you can look that up through many sites. You can opt out of those, but most people don't. So is it the responsibility of the organization, or is it the liability of the organization to protect that low criticality data? I don't know. That's a good question, but I would say probably, I would say you have to tier it, Social security card numbers, anything, again, yeah, you would have to tier it. What are your guys' thoughts?
What say you?
Yeah, I think it's going to be definitely like a hybrid. There's no yes or no. I do think there could be more strict, controls and or fines, if you will, around this. I think, if it's like you said, financial versus say health and things like that, you absolutely should be doing what you can, right? But at the end of the day, I think we all know that, is it possible to prevent every little cyber event? Probably not. I mean, honestly, right? So you would need to spend your company's entire budget on potentially cyber, and then it's like, well, what's the point of running a company? So there's no, I'd say yes or no answer, but I do think that we as a cybersecurity community in general, kind of where things are going, need to be more vigilant and diligent. And I do think there are some people that treat this as like, hey, I want to just check the box. I don't want to pay any money and just kind of get me out of this. That's a problem, right? When companies try to purposely skirt the system, I think it's kind of more like, hey, if you're found that if you've done generally like your due diligence and you've tried to do this and done the right things, but still get breached, it'd be hard to say like, hey, you were at fault. If you were under attack of like a nation state or something like this, could say on SolarWinds breach, like you'd have no clue, right? So who's at fault there, right? So there's no, I think, right or wrong, but I do think it needs to be more aware to, the world at this point.
Definitely.
What about you?
So my opinion on it is that it's definitely a tiered system. If the data's already out there, it's worth less. So how can you have a strict liability or a massive amount of responsibility at that point on that type of data? If it's all of my personal financial transactions, it's worth more. Because now you know my patterns and everything else. And so that should definitely have a higher use case on it. But we definitely need a grant. We need a floor, right? I think CCPA helps put some of that in there as well, to have like a base that you can go back and try to get $750 or whatever the case is in that scenario with a data leak. But the burden's on you, the consumer, to go get that.
Right.
So I do think we need some type of base, no matter what it is, to hold companies accountable to have that baseline security. And then it just comes down to, what is that data? Is it already available on the dark web? Because if it is, it's worth less overall from that perspective. So that's where I would kind of put it to, as a tiering system based on what the data is. If it's an email address, I mean, it's just not
considered
worth
out there
as
anyway.
much.
Yeah.
Right.
But I really like your point, though, in considering how it happened, because let's just say you did take all the necessary precautions, you're compliant, but they just had an O day that you simply could not, like FireEye, right? Like the best of the best, they got caught. In those situations, should you be held liable? Probably not, because the factors were outside of your control, so long as you did the minimum requirements. So maybe it's a two-piece thing. You tier the data, but then you also understand like what steps did you take to ensure that? And if it appears that it's outside that threshold, then
Well, then how do we flip it? Okay, we're talking about private companies now. Let's say like it's a government entity, the Department of XYZ, they get breached, and now my information's out there. Who's going to hold them liable, or who's going to make them pay? When it's like, well, did you guys do everything you could have on that? Maybe, maybe not. And it becomes this kind of weird issue. So,
well, that goes right into the bill.
I know. Good segue. It's almost like I planned
right.
that.
No way.
I like what you did there.
Perfect timing. So yeah, the other topic we want to go over is the infrastructure bill. Not from a political perspective at all. It's more about, from a cybersecurity. There was about $2 billion roughly for cybersecurity kind of spend across various agencies and different kind of buckets, and CISAs in there and things like that. So I don't know, Brian, you want to kind of start us off on that one?
Well, I know one of the biggest challenges we have today is the lack of communication. I almost said miscommunication, but lack of communication across the departments, right? So the FBI is chartered to be national and local to us citizens. And then you have the NSA that's more outside the U.S. And you have the military. And the military is not supposed to be within our borders per se from that perspective. Like, sure, they defend us, but they can't be in our business as personal citizens. So I think it really, the bill is going to help break down some of those barriers with CISA and have some of the command centers and some of the additional communication and things that will go on from there, hire some more people, help get some vulnerability assessments and some baselines out there, help get into some of the cloud environments and get rid of some of those old legacy systems to help reduce that technical debt and liability that's sitting out there.
I think that's a really big one too, is like, a lot of these systems have been built over 30, 40 years in some cases, right? And they're just still running out there. So really, I think we all know that systems like that are hard to patch. They're hard to kind of work on, and people that kind of know them have just retired, or like, they don't exist anymore, right? So really modernizing that type of application infrastructure really reduces your risk and your threat surface, right? Because it's now much more modern. It's written in like modern code. It's scalable. It's cloud native, and inherently by design, you can make it more secure day one versus 20 years ago or even longer. Security wasn't even like a thing. It was just didn't exist, right? So
Right, and you're really you're at that point, governments will start to have far less low-hanging fruit because that's the issue now is that they just present such easy vulnerabilities or really they're just so vulnerable. It's very easy to exploit them or to breach them. So they're just raising that standard by at least starting to cover some of the technical debt should have pretty big impacts moving into the future. The only thing about it though is I wonder how the talent pool how that equation will work into this equation, because it's one thing to have the budget for the technology, but then you also need the talent and the resources to implement it correctly, which is half the battle in cybersecurity. So how they intend on creating a pipeline of expertise, because that's something that we struggle with right now in private.
that's a good point.
They're going to struggle with it in government. So, I'm very happy to see so much money being thrown at it, but I'm also very curious to see how that piece of the equation will be handled. So.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, right? Like you might have this budget, and it might be like, okay, hey, we want to do X, Y, Z. That's great. It's going to take us 20 years though, because we don't have the people to do it, or we have to hire private sector and things like that. I think also an important note about this is this doesn't just mean like private companies are magically going to get money for cybersecurity. It's focused on the government, the federal, and things like that. But in theory, it should trickle down because it's going to help drive new standards. Like CISA might say, hey, if you're working with a government agency and you're a defense contractor, maybe the new standard is you have to do these 5 different things now, which then in turn drives everything else. So it's not a magic bucket of cybersecurity money, but in the grand scheme, it's going to trickle down and kind of help. Because I do think we need it. I think we all know that cybersecurity is extremely important to the country and to the citizens and things like that. So it's good to see the effort being put on this and not kind of swept aside saying, oh, it's just cybersecurity. And, now it's like a board level, it's a federal level. It has the top White House attention. We have these things like REvil, with multiple government agencies working together. So it's kind of become this top of mind awareness, which to me is actually really cool to see and kind of see it go in the right direction to some extent, right?
It's funny how it took things like SolarWinds and Colonial for,
it's the compelling event.
Right,
I mean, like we see it in the private sector too, where companies like, well, I know I should do this, and then they don't, and then something happens, and they're like, hey, what was that thing you said we should do again? Like,
Right.
I mean, we see it all the time, unfortunately, but that's kind of, same with like your health. Sometimes people will be like, oh, I don't need to work out. And they have some kind of health scare, and they're like, okay, wow, maybe I should actually take this seriously. So
Right.
it's just kind of, I think, how humans work sometimes.
Yep.
Well, thankfully it was, the impact was only limited to what it was for Colonial, because it certainly could have been a lot worse. And I think that's what, they're really trying to avoid here is some major ramification that could potentially impact lives at a massive scale. So, and which it did, but, even worse, right? So that's why I'm hoping this bill will go to the right places. A lot of it will be about not just allocation, but efficiency with the budget, because it's very easy to spend without meaningful progress, right? What I don't want to see is people slapping in, next generation, I'm air quoting, software and
Where's our keywords?
Right,
AI,
yeah.
ML, blockchain, all that
Right.
good stuff.
And
now.
just slapping
EDR,
it in there.
XDR, it's all the same.
and just thinking that they're secure. It's like you have
Meta-based
to-
firewalling now.
Right.
You heard it here first.
Nice. Well, one thing that I do see kind of coming out of all of this is CMMC just announced 2.0, and they're going to have a little town hall here shortly and get some more updates out there. But I think you're going to see that expand outside the DoD contracts, and you're going to start seeing that apply to many government contracts. It's the framework that seems to make sense. There's an entry level way to get in at the 1.0. Then you go to a 2.0 where you have an auditor, and then the 3.0 where you have additional government audits and whatnot that will be required in the new model. But I foresee that kind of being the way forward. And I've heard this in the industry over more and more in the last couple of weeks, that people are saying that this is going to be the de facto. And it's common sense items in there. There's 17 controls to get started with that make it really reduce your risk is really the way I should say it. Just by doing those 17 things.
That's what it's all about, reducing risk and just every day get a little bit better at something, right? So
yep.
Same works out.
Risk reduction. Yep. We're just trying to make the target smaller. That's all it is.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's a good point.
It's a lot harder to hit if it's really, really small. So
that's a good point. What was that? Aim small, miss small? Is that the saying? Yeah. Something like that?
Nice.
We're on it today. I think, Sammy, you have one you kind of want to go over. It's our friend SolarWinds again. Yes. Back at it with some new information.
Yeah, they're back in the news. I'm sure they're loving all of this publicity. What is that? Or
there's no such thing as bad publicity.
Bad publicity. I don't know. This might be bad publicity.
Like a catchphrase, like a catchphraseometer. This episode. It's been funny.
Yeah, we've been hitting it.
Get all the zingers.
We need a buzzer. Where's our laugh track here?
Oh, yeah. You can add it in post.
Yeah. So, the SolarWinds ServView application is being abused by what is dubbed as TA505 threat actor. And this group is known for extortion using the CLOP ransomware, excuse me. And so they're using this ServView vulnerability as their initial access method to gain access onto the systems. But essentially, the ServView managed file transfer and ServView secure FTP are affected by this vulnerability that spawns a subprocess that is controlled by the adversary and basically allows them to deploy tools to pivot throughout the network. NCC Group, I'm not sure if I mentioned that earlier, was the ones that discovered it, but they've released a set of different mitigations that you can apply, including, of course, patching and many of those different things. But interesting to see them back in the news, and it sounds like Microsoft is, or actually I think it was, let me see, they reported about how many servers affected globally. Let me see here. I think it was couple thousand in the US, but it was initially 94% of servers prior to the disclosure of the patch were affected globally. Now, even after the patch, it's still 66%. And so the valid numbers were 2,784 servers in the wild still affected by this vulnerability.
That's quite a bit, actually.
Yeah.
It kind of almost comes back to our topic that we had with the exchange where I think it was the FBI was in there poking around, basically patching people's servers. Like, are we going to start to see this again where SolarWinds is saying, hey, I'm going to start patching my servers for you and things like that? Who knows? But again, more scary stuff because we all know that, a SolarWinds type system controls a lot of other systems and kind of spawns out deep and wide. So, like one's, essentially compromised system could have access to thousands of networks or nodes or even other customers, right? So,
and generally usually highly privileged processes.
They're admin and full right credentials, and they usually live on subnets that have wide access, like everything we talked about in the past. So
running as system, right? So it's
password one,
right? Yeah.
SolarWinds one. I don't know, maybe.
They might have wisened up. I hope.
I guess the good news is it sounds like there's remediation, there's patching. It's just, again, doing that legwork to actually do all this stuff is, hey, this is why patching is important, right? It's out there for a reason. So,
yeah, and then making sure that these blue teams are ingesting these IOCs as part of their program and ensuring that they're actually monitoring for these events. There are some pretty clear indicators for this one. I won't go into the details because it gets pretty nitty gritty, but the NCC Group has released the summary of checks on their site, so feel free to check them out, and they should have some more information there. But one thing that was interesting was there was about twice as many of these vulnerable servers in China than the US. And then after that, everything else is in the sub 100 numbers. But it's just interesting to note that China and the U.S. have like a substantial volume of these servers in comparison to the rest of the world.
So what that proves is none of us patch across the world.
Yeah, Yeah, the two biggest economies in the world
People
are
are
not
afraid
patching,
to
so-
patch after SolarWinds.
It might break, Brian. It might break my app.
Right. No kidding. That's a good point because it's like, we're vulnerable if we don't patch. They're damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah,
right?
it's kind of one of these, like, I'm sure people just haven't like unplugged it yet, and things like that. So
Yeah.
crazy.
Good stuff.
All right, gentlemen. Well, I think that kind of wraps up our show for today, and thanks for joining, and looking forward to the next one. And yeah,
Click
Take
that
care,
like
guys.
and
Yeah.
subscribe button below.
smash that like button.
All right, take
Do it.
care.
See ya.
Take care, guys.